I've always been a huge fan of fighting games, and growing up I also had a huge interest in Transformers, so upon hearing it would be getting its own game based on the popular Beast Wars spin-off, I jumped at the chance to play it. Unfortunately, it would never find its way outside of Japan, but due to the nature of the game, it's easy for non-Japanese speakers to jump in and enjoy what it has to offer. As with most fighters, you've got a selection of characters to choose from who all share a range of basic moves like punches and kicks, but what helps each stand out from the next is the ability to switch between two different states, those being your robot form as well as your beast. Both transformations have different abilities, and with each character also having multiple super moves, there's a lot to experiment with when it comes to choosing which character to settle on as your go-to. It plays almost identically to many of the other 2D fighters out there, with your character's moves being dictated by certain motion inputs on the D-pad in conjunction with hits of the face buttons to pull them off. Mechanically, it's not super complex beyond the transformation gimmick, but there is a meter at the bottom of the screen that has to be charged manually, which can be expended in a power boosting hyper mode or one of the many different super moves that each character possesses. Presentation is pretty good too. The sprites are tiny but still manage to be fairly detailed and full of character and charm, and they're really well animated, giving each move and hit a believable weight during each fight. When it comes down to it, the Game Boy wasn't really well known for its fighting games, but Beast Wars proved that the system was more than capable of producing something on par with its console counterparts. During the days of the PlayStation, a somewhat quirky RPG known as Azure Dreams released for the console, which offered up the perfect mix of several genres. It never really hit the ground running, and somewhat fell into obscurity as a result, but a few years later it would receive a port for the Game Boy Color. Sure, the inferior hardware meant that several corners had to be significantly cut, but on the whole it managed to retain the essence of the game. The story is very simplistic and follows the escapades of a young boy who longs to explore a famed monster tower that looms over his home village. Following in the footsteps of his deceased father, he decides to embark on the journey in his memory, but you won't be alone though, as you'll also have the help of your monster companion that's useful in several ways. Each time you enter the tower, your level is set to 1, and through the many battles and items you find, you'll slowly grow in strength, allowing you to explore for longer periods of time. And what makes it even better is that each floor is randomly generated, so no one playthrough is the same as the last. Finally, the game doesn't go with the type of battle system most standard RPGs offer. Basically, every step and action you take while in a tower is one turn, with monsters moving while you do. Because of this, there isn't a battle every 5 seconds, which is certainly a different approach, but you're given a lot of freedom to strategize as a result. Obviously, with the nature of the tower, the replayability that Azure Dreams cooks up is by far one of its most impressive aspects, and will easily last you hours upon hours to see everything it has to offer. If you can find it for a decent price or are looking for a new RPG to emulate, then you should give this one a try. Magical Chase is a side-scrolling shooter that originally released for the PC Engine and would later go on to receive several ports, with the Game Boy Color getting its own version, and while it was extremely downgraded from its original form, it's quite possibly one of the best examples when it comes to shooters on the Game Boy. You play as Ripple, an aspiring young witch who is tasked with tracking down 6 demons she accidentally left free into the world. Along for the ride are 2 Star Maidens that constantly surround her and give you several options when it comes to completing each stage. You can control their position and firing direction, and because they can absorb certain types of attacks, they can also be used as a pretty handy form of defense. As with most shooters though, there's plenty of other weapons to get your hands on, with 9 in total becoming available throughout the game. You've got rapid fire options, wave beams, homing attacks, and even super powerful specials that are best saved for the game's bosses. As you take out enemies, you'll slowly accumulate currency, which can then be spent on other weapons and items that'll help you turn the tide against the wave of targets that come your way. To be fair, between your large life bar and the constant health drops from enemies, the game can be quite easy to get through, but thankfully there are several difficulty settings, with the highest noticeably changing the gameplay, and playing it like this is by far the best way to experience it. As with most games of its kind, it is quite a short adventure, but with its easy to pick up and play nature, it's not really something to hold against it. It is absolutely criminal that this game can't be easily acquired these days for a reasonable price, so emulation is the best way to go if you fancy trying it out. Blaster Master has long been a franchise that never gets the publicity it deserves. Ever since its first entry on the NES, it's always fallen behind the likes of Mega Man and other games of its kind, which is a real shame as it's by far one of the most innovative in its class. You play as Jason and utilize a tank as you tackle various levels of increasing difficulty. What makes it a bit different though is that this tank can jump and you're allowed to disembark at any time and continue on foot. This presents many moments throughout each stage where you'll have to switch between the two playstyles and think on your toes as to which approach is best for the current situation. Further expanding your options are several upgrades for your tank, such as engine boosters and different weapons that can make traversing each level and taking out all of its enemies far easier. The same can't be said for the bosses though, as it's here where a lot of the challenge lies, with each of them bringing their own type of threat to each encounter. You'll have to carefully study their attack pattern and wait for the right moment to unleash your attacks on them, which will no doubt cause a few deaths in the process. It's not all simply about blasting your way through each level though, as exploring is also a huge part of what makes Master Blaster so engaging. The previously mentioned upgrades for your tank are often hidden deep within catacombs that can only be reached on foot, and by doing this you'll constantly be combing over each area in order to find each and every benefit the game offers in terms of gameplay. If you're fond of platformers and are tired of the usual suspects on the console like Mario and Kirby for example, Blaster Master will make for a great change of pace. Quest on the Game Boy Color is essentially a port of an often overlooked Nintendo 64 RPG that managed to retain many of the aspects of its 3D counterpart and translates it to the 2D space quite nicely. You'll be embarking on the same quest, going through the same towns, fighting the same enemies, using the same battle strategies, all just without the extra dimension. As the name of the game implies, you'll take on the role of Brian as you set out to recover a mysterious book and find out what happened to your father, who decided to look for it himself but disappeared. The story's not going to win any awards, but it does set the stage for what is a pretty decent adventure that's thankfully filled with much more engaging gameplay than the narrative itself. The battles play out in a turn-based manner, with the player having the ability to freely run around the field and even dodge some of the incoming attacks, but the first striking difference is in the experience and leveling up systems. In particular, there is no general experience gained and no standard levels to be earned. Instead, improvement of statistics comes through the use of them. Other statistics such as HP, MP, agility and defense increase through the back and forth dodging and damage taking involved in battle. In addition to this, spells aren't gained by leveling or through scrolls or other methods, but by finding spirits while exploring and increasing a spirit meter while fighting. There are 200 total of these to find in game that makes exploring the world a truly rewarding task. As a whole, even if it's not quite as good as some other games on the handheld, it does make for a rather unique adventure that every fan of the genre should give a fair go. On first glance, Wendy Every Which Way may appear to be nothing more than a simple kids game, but writing it off on its appearance alone would be a huge mistake. The gameplay is what makes it, and this is due to one of the main mechanics that everything in the game revolves around, and that's the control of gravity. Instead of just providing a run-of-the-mill platforming adventure, WayForward built the game around this concept, which adds a huge strategic element to the minute-to-minute gameplay. Now the game is made up of 12 levels, which are divided into 4 separate worlds, each with their own look and feel as well as unique enemies that occupy each. The controls are incredibly easy to pick up, with the A button allowing you to jump and B seeing you fire your magic from your wand. By pressing both, this is how you change gravity that quickly flips the perspective and allows you to bypass enemies and obstacles that otherwise would be impossible. At the end of each of the worlds, you enter a bonus level, and here you ride a broom in a side-scrolling shooter. These stages offer a welcome break from the usual platforming and mix up the gameplay quite nicely as you make your way through the game. Visually, this is easily one of the Game Boy's most impressive games, as WayForward have always been known for their quality sprite work, and the early traces of that can be seen in the smooth animations of each and every action you take. If there was one negative I could throw at the game, it would be that it's just over way too soon, and once you've beaten it, there's not much of a reason to make your way through it again. With that aside though, Wendy Every Which Way is still one of the best options if you're looking for a platformer on the Game Boy. The best way to describe Mr. Driller would be that it's essentially a combination of both Tetris and Boulder Dash, where the main objective is to dig through differing shapes and coloured blocks to reach the bottom of a mineshaft. While it sounds like it's a simple matter of just drilling down until you reach the goal, there are a few elements that prevent this from being anything as easy as that. First of all, you've got a continuous depleting air meter, and if it runs out, you lose a life. To refill this meter, you have to pick up these capsules that give you 20% of your air back, which are mostly easy to get your hands on, but at times they'll be locked away behind certain blocks with an X painted on them, which themselves deplete your air upon breaking them. This is the only real challenge that Mr. Driller presents, which at certain points can become quite hectic, especially in some of the later levels that will really test your reflexes and speed. Now, the only real negative I took away from the game is that there just isn't that much to do outside of the main mode of play. Other options like survival or different difficulty settings are completely missing, which does hurt it overall. But if you're looking for something that's easy to pick up and play in short bursts, this is where Mr. Driller comes into its own. Overall, puzzle fans will have fun with this title, but after a while, even the most die-hard puzzlers will want to find something else. I do recommend this game though, or even better, the DS version, Drill Spirits, but if you do see this one for a good price, it would still make a welcome addition to anyone's Game Boy collection. Cannon Fodder was released in '93 for the Amiga and was subsequently ported to nearly every machine in existence during that period, including such obscure consoles like the 3DO and the Atari Jaguar. It plays like an oversimplified RTS that sees you having control of a squad of soldiers as you drop in behind enemy lines and are tasked with various objectives to complete. These soldiers are controlled as one single unit, moving in a single line, but it is possible to split them up into smaller divisions when it comes to providing cover fire or laying down for an ambush on the enemy. Down the line, these tactics become central to achieving your goal that usually consists of taking out each enemy or destroying specific buildings within their base. This is where they respawn, so taking them out first is usually a good idea if you hope to stand a chance against the near endless waves of enemies that appear throughout each stage. During the course of the game, other elements are also introduced such as vehicles, traps and wildlife, as well as several different locations such as jungles, deserts and ice plains, which add some variation, but the fundamental gameplay never really changes. Cannon Fodder is a classic from a bygone era that is still very playable today, which is partially due to its simplicity, but can also be attributed to its dark sense of humour that permeates throughout the entire game. As for aesthetics, the music and sound aren't as good as in the original Amiga version, but the graphics do a good job of staying true to the other versions and look really good on the small screen. Despite some shortcomings with the game's difficulty and some odd choices when it comes to control, Cannon Fodder is still an absolute blast to play through. Power Quest is easily one of the Game Boy's most overlooked and underrated games, which brought together elements from both fighters and RPGs that results in one of the most addictive experiences you'll find on the handheld. It's largely split up into two separate styles of play, with the first seeing you exploring a huge town filled with various NPCs and shops that allow you to improve your character over time for the use of credits, which are rewarded at the end of each fight. By walking around the town, you'll randomly be thrown into one of these encounters, which presented in a standard 2D fighting setup. Here you've got your basic heavy and light attack, as well as a selection of special moves that can all be comboed into, and here is where most of the fun lies in figuring out the best strategies to defeat your enemy in the quickest amount of time. As I mentioned earlier though, it's the RPG aspects of the game that really help elevate it above the others on the system. As each character is essentially a robot, you get the option to upgrade and customize your machine to match how you approach each fight. These can be new parts, new moves, and even a boost to your attributes that have a noticeable effect when facing down another robot. Further mixing things up is the inclusion of several modes that help prolong the game well after the story is wrapped up. There's several options, but survival is easily the best of the bunch, which sees you taking on a constant series of battles against opponents of increasing difficulty until you fail. If you want a good fighting game that you can bring along with you wherever you go, then Power Quest will not disappoint. Star Ocean has long been one of my favourite RPG franchises, and even though Blue Sphere never made its way outside of Japan, it's now fully playable in English thanks to a dedicated fanbase that have helped bring this forgotten adventure to the West. It takes place right after the events of Second Story, and brings back the entire cast of characters for another journey to undertake. As with many RPGs, you'll be meeting up with a band of like-minded heroes in the hopes of combating an ancient evil that's wreaking havoc amongst the solar system. Even though the premise this might be a bit cliche, the gameplay is what makes Blue Sphere such a stellar experience, and this is mainly during battle, which serves as the main highlight of the game, and is all carried out in real time through something known as the linear motion battle system that sees up to 3 of your heroes taking on enemies at the same time. Here you've got a huge selection of abilities to pull off, from your basic melee attacks to the far more impressive magic and specific skills that make taking on even the most common of enemies all the more engaging. Naturally, you'll be developing your characters over the course of the adventure through each of their development charts, where you're free to spend any skill points you've attained on any desired attribute. This lends a welcome amount of freedom to how each character develops, and with so many abilities for them to learn, it's great to experiment with. What really blew me away though is just how incredible this game looks on the small screen. It simply just doesn't look like a Game Boy game thanks to the range of detail both in sprites and the various locations you'll visit. It even throws in some sprite-based cutscenes for several story moments that really add to the various plot threads throughout the journey. Overall, when it comes to RPGs on the Game Boy, it really doesn't get any better than Blue Sphere. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos which release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways as well. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. Thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.